If you like photo adventures into the middle of nowhere, you're in the right place. This adventure doesn't quite take you to the middle of nowhere, but you can definitely see it from there. Join me for a trip to a remote mountainous area of northeastern Nevada called the Ruby Mountains. My goal in this trip was to photograph wildlife in the South Ruby Lake National Wildlife Refuge, which is situated in a beautiful mountain valley many miles from our home in Carson City, Nevada. The first 337 miles are on I-84 with a speed limit of 80 miles an hour as we drive by Winnemucca, Battle Mountain, and Elko to arrive at Halleck Junction. The last 70 miles on Highway 229 from Halleck Junction take 1.5 to 2.5 hours on rough asphalt, followed by better gravel roads, passing remote cattle ranches as you drive deeper into the Ruby Mountains at 25 or most 35 miles per hour, especially if you're pulling a trailer as we were. Eventually, we arrived at the refuge and found the headquarters building closed due to COVID. We therefore went in search of the Forest Service campground. Unlike many refuges, this refuge has a campground. It's dry camping only, although with water spigots and clean pit toilets. It's a small campground with only about 30 sites. We immediately met the campground manager, who was very friendly and helpful. The refuge itself is a 37,632 acre vertically oriented rectangle running north to south, measuring 16 miles in length and 3 miles in width, with a gravel road down the west side. The rest of the area is in the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest. The refuge is also unique in that it has its own water supply from multiple springs in addition to the snowmelt from the Ruby Mountains. Despite this, it was immediately evident that the water levels were low, another victim of the current Western megadrought. Something else unique about this refuge is that boating is allowed for an extended period of time after spring nesting season. As the slide shows, motorless boats and boats with electric motors are allowed from June 15th until July 31st. Boats with gas engines of less than 10 horsepower are allowed from August 31st to December 31st, making this refuge extremely popular with anglers, and also an ideal area for waterfowl photography from a canoe, a kayak, or a small boat. My initial search of the refuge was rewarded by views of small herds of pronghorn. Although frequently referred to as antelope, they are not, but rather a species of their own unique to North America. In fact, they are actually a part of the giraffe family and not closely related to the African antelope at all. Also known as the fastest mammal in North America, they can run up to 55 miles an hour for short distances. I was immediately struck by the size difference of the male versus the female pronghorn, with the males being definitely larger and more muscular than the females, which can only be described as dainty. While they reportedly have 13 different gaits, it's my observation that the females prance rather than run at slow speeds. Though the herds were a bit shy, I was able to photograph pairs of pronghorn, as well as a small herd of females, both at rest and running, using my Nikon D500 and Nikon 500 millimeter f5.6 PF lens. My favorite wildlife lens, as it is very sharp, with exceptionally good autofocus and light enough to handhold. Not shy at all were the greater sage grouse sitting in the road and nearby. They were so tame that I had to wait for them to vacate the road so I could continue my journey looking for other wildlife, after a few photos, of course. Greater sage grouse are found in Nevada and throughout the Intermountain West. They're about the size of a chicken. These grouse were a mottled brown color without the more colorful facial markings of mating season. The following day, I saw another small flock and got a better photo, again with the D500 and my 500 millimeter lens. An endangered species, the greater sage grouse numbers are declining due to habitat fragmentation and loss. Their mating process also limits their reproductive capabilities too. Mating occurs in large open areas known as leks, where males display for and court females. The females are totally in charge and choose which male to mate with. Sound familiar? Many of the females may mate with the same male, resulting in decreased genetic diversity. Their existence is also threatened by the grouse's need for large areas of uninterrupted sagebrush steppe, which conflicts with ranching, mining, and other development activities. So far, the grouse are losing the battle. A common sight in northern Nevada is American white pelicans. These large white birds with a 9-foot wingspan, black wingtips, and a large yellow beak are rather graceless on the ground, but elegant in flight. There were 30 or so on the auto route that remained largely immobile, except for one that posed nicely for me. At other times, I've been able to photograph them in flight and never tired of seeing and photographing that way, as they were beautiful and graceful in flight. Interestingly, pelicans will feed cooperative, much like humpback whales who drive fish to a given location where they can be scooped up. They do not, however, hold food in their bills, but swallow it immediately. Although they breed in the interior of Western states, they migrate to the coast in winter, including California, but as far south as Central America and South America. Because of their large size, their only predator is man. Fortunately, these beautiful birds are not a threatened species. A surprise finding in the refuge was a greater yellowlegs. I usually consider these to be shorebirds, but here they were in a high desert marsh. These tiny birds are typically solitary, as this one was, with long yellow legs, as the name implies. Typically, they are found in marshy areas or other wetlands where they feed on small fish and aquatic invertebrates, that is. This one remained at a distance, so it's small in the frame, even with my 500 millimeter lens. Other findings included a great white egret, a pair of double-crested cormorants, and a handful of pied-billed grebes. A common bird, but not one I'd photographed before. They don't fly much, but usually hide or submerge to hide from predators. A few canvasbacks were also seen, and a lot of mallards, of course. I'd hoped to see desert bighorn sheep, but after extensive glassing of the cliffs, none were to be found. We had planned to stay for several days, but on the third day, the valley was enveloped in a dense cloud of smoke from one or more of the many Western megafires of 2021, making photography and breathing difficult. So we left for areas with better air quality. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for listening and watching. Each episode is published on the 15th and 30th of the month. Tune in on October 30th when I chat with wildlife photographer Daniel J. Cox about bear photography, particularly polar bear photography. Bye for now.